You know, one other suggestion we'd like to make if you're considering planting some containers for your patio or deck this summer is to consider the Mediterranean herbs. A lot of them lend themselves very well to container culture. Just make sure that you have a really well-drained mix. For instance, we have some creeping thyme right here, and that will cascade over the edge of a pot just beautifully. I've just been clipping this back a little bit. Honeybees do enjoy foraging on the flowers, but if you're growing it for the foliage in order to dry it down and have it for seasoning this winter, you want to keep the flowers cut back until fall and harvest as much of the foliage as you can during the growing season. Let's take a look at some of the other Mediterranean herbs that would look really good in a container. One, of course, is sage, and you really only need one plant of sage because it's a very strong scented herb. It doesn't take very much to use it in culinary purposes. Then back on over here, we have some basil, and basil is one of the bargains in the garden because you can just plant a few from seed and you have plenty for use on pizzas and in Italian cooking. However, we also like to make a pesto with it, and with that it takes quite a few bunches of it, so you might want 5 or 6 plants if you enjoy making that quite a bit. Right here is rosemary, and rosemary is not quite hardy in all parts of Oklahoma. If you live down around southeast Oklahoma, it'll grow just fine. But if you're out in the northwest, you probably need to dig it up and bring it in the winter. It does well in a clay pot indoors in the wintertime. That's another one that you could put in the center of a container and then put these larger herbs around it. Well, that pretty well does it for the Mediterranean herbs. There's one right here that you may not be familiar with if you're new to herb growing, and that is French sorrel. And we've had a lot of people out here touring, and they see this in the herb garden. They say, "What are you doing with dock in your garden? That's a noxious weed. You ought to get that out of there." Well, it is related to the curly dock that's considered a weed, but this is a different species of dock. It's called French sorrel. It has fairly narrow leaves, and if you chew on them, they have a very sprightly, lemony flavor that really cleanses your palate, and that's due to the oxalic acids in there. It is a nice addition to salads. If you don't have lemon juice to squirt into a salad and make it real savory, just pick some French sorrel leaves and break them up in there. Now, normally you don't want to let it go to flower and seed. You can cut these heads and dry them, and they're nice in dried arrangements. Just clip them off and rubber band them together and hang them upside down. Normally though, if you want all leaves, you need to keep those cut back. Let's take a look back over here. We have some tarragon. This is French tarragon, and it needs a little extra mulch to make it through the winter here, but it's an excellent addition to different vegetable and fish dishes. And I'm going to cut some of that and show you how easy it is to dry herbs. Now, with perennial herbs such as tarragon, you don't want to wait too late in the summer to cut it back for saving it, and you really only want to cut it back by about half and allow it time to regrow foliage for later in the season. In fact, I'm not going to take all of it at one time, but just enough to cut up and put into this sack and give it time to regrow. And as you go out to the herb garden, just keep a rubber band handy and wrap that around so you have a nice bunch of it. And you could hang that up in a garage or a shed, someplace warm and dry and airy. If you have a plant that has seed on it, such as dill or fennel where you're collecting the seed, you might want to put it into a paper sack. And I've just perforated this a few times with the tip of a pen. And all you do is just stick that down in there, put a clip on that, and just hang it up to dry. It works out real well. Let's take a look at a couple of other herbs and some tips on how to harvest them. Right here, we have some chives, and this is typical of what a lot of people do with chives. They go out and they'll just snip a few off and put them on their baked potato or whatever, but plants that have a strap-like, almost grassy leaf like this really should not be harvested halfway back like that, because look what happens. It turns yellow and gets real stunted and unattractive, and those are not going to be useful again. The way that you want to harvest them is just snip them down at the base and get long pieces like that and harvest them that way. Last of all, we have a special surprise to show you. When you grow dill and fennel in the garden, and particularly dill, it also is a home to butterflies. And this morning, John Dole, one of our faculty members, brought this bucket out to us, and he had kept some dill in a jar because he had seen some chrysalis on there that had formed from butterflies. And we have a black swallowtail right here. It has just come out of the chrysalis and it's just about ready to take off. Its wings are drying and there it goes. So there are lots of special surprises out in the herb garden. Just be prepared for them.
We hope you enjoyed this video. It's part of our OK Gardening Classics YouTube channel. You can also find more recent videos on our Oklahoma Gardening YouTube channel. And join us on social media for great gardening tips, photos, and discussion.